Welcome back to The Heat as we continue our discussion about the thousands of migrants who've died at sea this year trying to make their way to Europe. Joining us now from Amsterdam is Jorrit Rijpma. He is an associate professor at Leiden University in the Netherlands, and he's an expert on European law. Jorrit, thanks for joining us. We've just heard about the challenges, the major challenges that these migrants face getting across the sea, trying to come to Europe, and those lucky enough, of course, to make landfall. But once they reach European countries, what is their legal status? What is immigration law in Europe?
Well, basically every member state of the European Union has still its own asylum law, but applies harmonized European rules. The problem is really which country has to take responsibility. And according to a piece of legislation called the Dublin Regulation, that is the country's first arrival. So that means that the pressure on the southern member states, merely because of their geographical location, is quite high. So you see that Italy, Greece, they are all facing quite an influx of immigrants and asylum seekers, and they are the ones that actually have to deal with those asylum requests.
Right, these are these South Mediterranean countries. Now, do the refugees get to stay, or can they be deported?
Well, that depends. If they, of course, are in protection need, then the member states of the European Union are bound both by European law and by international law, by the Geneva Convention. There's no such thing as a right to asylum, but you cannot send people back to countries where they may face torture or inhumane conditions and where they are really in fear of their life. So what we currently see is that people are coming from territories from war-ridden territories. I mean, if you look at the nationalities of people coming in, we see a huge increase of Eritreans, of Syrians, people from Gaza. So these are countries and these are people that are likely to have real protection needs, yes.
Right, as you say, people coming from war zones, other people coming from conflicts which are in neighboring countries. But under international conventions, are the countries where they land legally bound to grant them sanctuary?
They are not bound to give them asylum, but they are obliged, they are under an obligation which is called non-refoulement. You shall not send anyone back to a country where their life is at risk or where they are at danger of being treated in an inhumane or degrading manner. And so basically these people are to that extent stuck in limbo.
Can the situation continue as it is? I mean, can Europe cope with this?
It is interesting, actually, because today, or yesterday, actually, was the hearing of the new Commissioner for Migration and Home Affairs, so the highest-ranking official of the European Union dealing with migration matters. And he was very clear that the idea of a fortress Europe, of a fortification of our borders, is not the solution. But interestingly, what we've seen so far is exactly that, is that we have seen Europe responding to this crisis with increased border controls, whereas the real problem really is that these people, first of all, need to be saved, and secondly, that Europe needs to come up with a real solution in the sense that they also have to see a real distribution of the responsibility there, because for now, that Dublin regulation that I mentioned before puts quite a burden on the southern member states.
And as we see this resistance among certain European countries, I mean, how much concern is there about the fact that we now have things like Ebola, which is spreading? We also have increasing militancy in Syria as well as in Iraq. There are governments throughout the world which are now trying to put a stop to people moving across these borders to join these militant groups, etc. I mean, what kind of screening process is there?
I really think that the Ebola issue is unrelated to the current asylum crisis that we see. There is, of course, within Europe concern about terrorism, but that is largely concerning nationals of European member states going to Syria to fight there, and the fear is that when they return, they may have radicalized. So there is a genuine concern rather for the well-being of these people, which, as we can safely say, most of them are from war-ridden zones and are and really do have protection needs. So Europe is very conscious. The problem is, of course, that these people are coming from areas, from zones of international conflict, and that there's no easy solution for that. So as these conflicts will continue, we are likely to see the current levels of migration and even an increase. We can see, for instance, the last major influx was in 2011 at the start of the Arab Spring. We are now already at almost fourfold of the numbers of what we saw back then. So
Right, we just had one of our previous guests talk about the role that smugglers are playing in these people moving, the migrants moving across the Mediterranean, reaching Europe. In many respects, these are criminal actions which are being taken by the smugglers. We heard of that very tragic incident where the smugglers deliberately rammed a boat off Malta. 500 people lost their lives there. What kind of legal action can European governments take against these smugglers? I mean, are they going to be brought to justice?
Well, there's obviously both international legislation and European legislation against human smugglers. We do need to realize with the limited means of legal migration to Europe and the difficulty of actually gaining access to asylum, very often human smugglers are the only people that these asylum seekers can turn to. A second problem is that, of course, the obligation to save people at sea is a genuine one, and there is the risk that people that will now, for instance, fishermen or just cruise ships that come to the rescue will all of a sudden be accused of human smuggling because they are aiding people, whereas they are really rescuing them. So we should really be very careful to distinguish between the organized crime and people just trying to rescue at sea.
Jorrit Rijpma, thank you for joining us, sir.